Hello aspirants, today's topic of discussion is Quasi Federalism. In the previous class we have seen the division of powers. The state's power can be divided into two categories. One is it can be divided horizontally. The powers can be divided vertically as well. So the horizontal division of powers we have already seen. This concept is called doctrine of separation of powers, which we have discussed already, which was proposed by Montesquieu, and we have discussed it. Separation of powers of the state into three organs like legislature, executive and judiciary. Now there is something called vertical division of powers. The vertical division of powers between two or more levels. So the power, the state power can be, the entire power can be divided into multiple levels, two or more levels vertically, not horizontally. Horizontally means the entire state power is divided like this: legislature, executive and judiciary. This is the entire power. It was horizontally divided. Now there is something called vertical division of power. Vertical means like a ladder. Like a ladder means here everything is lies on the flat. All have equal powers. Whereas the vertical means there is a hierarchy. Hierarchy means there at the top level there is a government, at the lower level there are other governments, something like that. So there is a ladder like structure where there is hierarchy. This is called central government, and there could be state government. So if the powers are divided between two levels, that is central and state government, we call it as a two-level federal government. The vertical division of powers between two or more levels is called the vertical division of powers between two or more levels. So here two levels are there. In case if the state governments share their power with the lower level governments, that is local governments, this is a three-tier or three-level distribution of powers. This is a three-level federal structure. So this is a two-level federal structure. So federalism means vertical division of powers. Now we will see what is Quasi Federalism. So before discussing Quasi Federalism, world over we have two types of governments, two basic types of governments. One thing is a unitary type or unitary state. Second thing is federal state. So unitary state and a federal state. Unitary state means, as the name suggests, the entire power of the state is concentrated in a single level. There are no levels at the single power center called single government, central government. Whereas federal state, in federal state, just now we have discussed, it is a vertical division of power. Federal states means in federal governments there is a vertical division of powers. There are two or more levels of government. There is a central government at the top and there are state governments. Various state governments will be there at the lower levels. So there is a vertical sharing, power sharing agreement. Federalism is nothing but a power sharing agreement between two or more levels. So there is a one type unitary form of government is there. Kendrikruta vyavastha antam. Kendrikruta, ekikruta vyavasthalu. Second thing, federal, Samakhya Vedanam. Samakhya type of governments. So these are two types. Actually there are, strictly speaking, these two are basic types, and there are other kinds of వీటి రెండింటిని మిక్స్ చేసి other types of వస్తాయి. They are called quasi. Quasi means semi, means they have the characteristics of both unitary form as well as federal form. So unitary form as well, they have both. Quasi means semi, it's like half of the features they acquire from the unitary form of government, and other half of features they acquire from federal. So therefore they have mixed characteristics. Quasi federal states have mixed characteristics. They have certain characteristics which are unitary in nature. The other characteristics are they're federal in nature. So we'll see what is what are the actual characteristics of quasi federalism. The best example is India's case. India is a classic example of quasi federalism. Why we call quasi federal? Most of the political scientists world over who have studied Indian constitution and Indian state, they call India as a quasi federal state, quasi federal form of government we have. So we have Casey Ware. KCVR, he calls India as a quasi-federal government. We have quasi-federal constitution. So he says India is a quasi-federal. Similarly, Granville Austin is a British political scientist. He also calls India as a unitary state with centralizing tendency. So they call cooperative federalism. He calls cooperative federalism. India's federalism is a quasi-federalism or cooperative federalism. We'll see why we call India as a quasi-federalism. What are the reasons behind it? We call India as a quasi-federal because it has the features of both unitary form of government, unitary features, as well as federal features. We'll see what are the unitary features that are there in Indian Constitution. At the same time, we see what are the federal features. Though in the first and foremost point is the in the Indian Constitution, nowhere it is mentioned that India is a federal state. India, in the Article 1 itself, they say India is a union of states. So whenever we talk about India, we call it as Indian Union, not Indian Federation. Just like American Federation, we don't talk, or any other Australia or Canadian Federation, we don't talk about India as a federation. We talk about India as a union, and there is no mention of the word federal in the Indian Constitution. So this is one example that the India has unitary features. So it is a union of states, not a federation of states. And the second thing, we have a single constitution. Despite the vast length and breadth of the country and vast diversity, we have only single constitution for the entire country. Whereas in America, there is a federal constitution. For each state, they have their own separate constitutions. So in India, despite the diversity, despite the vastness, we have only single constitution for the entire country. Similarly, we have only single citizenship. Eka Paurisatvam. Andaru Indians. They may live in various states, but all of them are Indians. We only have single Indian citizenship and single passport. So there are no dual citizenship in the country, whereas in USA, we have dual citizenship. They are citizens of their respective states as well as the US federal government. They are citizens of both. They have loyalties of both their state as well as the federal government. Similarly, we have other features like the appointment of the governor. The governor actually is the head of the states, executive head of the state, but he is appointed by whom? The central government. He is the agent of the center. Though he is a constitutional authority, he is still an agent of the center, acts according to their guidance at times, like particularly during the state emergency, etc. So therefore, the role of governor is one of the unitary features, means the states are indirectly being controlled by the central government. That is one of, and further we have All India services. We have 3 All India services: IAS, IPS and Indian Forest Service. Why we call them All India services is because the services are recruited by the central government, but they are appointed or they work for the state governments. That's why they are called All India services. So all these 3 services are All India services. They are recruited and appointed by the central government, but they work for the respective state governments. That's why the central government, that is how the central governments wields their control, exercises their control over the states. These are the various unitary features. Now we will see the certain federal features of the Indian Constitution or Indian state. So we have, the essence is to say that how the Indian Constitution, why it is called the quasi-federal, because it has the mixed features. It has the features of both unitary state as well as federal state. That's why it is called quasi-federal state. So what are the some of the federal features within the Indian Constitution? We have division of powers, division or distribution of powers between 2 levels. What are those 2 levels? Central government level and state government. So all the subjects were divided. There we have, the powers were divided into various lists. They are called union list and state list, and certain powers are distributed between both. They are called concurrent list. So they are called concurrent list. So the powers were distributed between 2 levels. So they were shared between two levels. That's why this is one of the feature of the federal system. And secondly, we have dual polity. Not only the powers were distributed, we have dual polity. Dual polity means two levels of political systems are there. Two levels are government system. Governments, we have parliamentary form at the central level, we have parliamentary form at the state level also. The central government is headed by the PM. At the same time, at the state level, we are headed by the Chief Minister. So we have dual polity. Not only the powers are distributed, we have dual polity as well. And similarly, under normal circumstances, India acts as a federal state. Under exceptional circumstances like emergency, which you can mention here, under the unitary feature, we can mention under exceptional circumstances, the Indian state acts as a unitary state. What are those exceptions? Emergencies. We have three kinds of emergencies. One is national emergency, the second is state emergency, or also called as president's rule. The third is financial emergency. Three kinds of emergencies, but whatever the emergency may be, under these circumstances, emergency circumstances, the country under normal circumstances, India acts as a federal state, whereas under exceptional circumstances like emergencies, the country acts as a unitary state. Means entire country operates as a single political entity, not as a central government or state governments, like that. Similarly, what are the other features, federal features, which are not directly mentioned, which are indirectly mentioned in the constitution? We have independent judiciary. We have independent judiciary. Another important feature is independent judiciary. Why the judiciary has to remain independent in a federal state? If it is a federal state, the judiciary has to be independent, because in a federal state there are two or more levels of governments. When there are two or more levels of government, there is this natural tendency of conflicts. So they are highly prone to conflicts between either center and state or between two or more states. So there is high chance of conflicts between two or more levels. So in order to redress or in order to address those conflicts, there should be some agency which must be independent of all the political influence, whether from central government or from the state government. It should be immune and independent from the influence by the legislature and executive. Therefore, the judiciary has to be independent. In India, the judiciary is thoroughly independent, and not only independent judiciary, judicial supremacy was also maintained by the constitution. That's why independent judiciary is one of the essential features of federal state. Next, similarly, we have bicameral system. Bicameralism means there are two houses. In the parliament, there are two houses. One is upper house called Rajya Sabha, and there is a lower house called Lok Sabha. The Lok Sabha is a people's house, whereas Rajya Sabha, the second house, the second chamber in the parliament, is a house of states. It's a council of states. It's called council of states. It's a state's house. So it is a representative of the states. Therefore, bicameralism is also one of the federal features. So similarly, we have number of other features which make India as a quasi-federal. So it has both unitary features as well as federal features. Therefore, India is rightly called as a quasi-federal. So మనకి రెండు యూనిటరీ ఏకీకృత విధానంకి సంబంధించిన అంశాలు కూడా ఉన్నాయి, అలాగే ఫెడరల్ సమాఖ్య విధానానికి సంబంధించిన అంశాలు కూడా మన ఇండియన్ కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ లో పొందుపరచబడి ఉన్నాయి. దట్స్ వై ఇండియా ఈజ్ కాల్డ్ యాజ్ ఎ రైట్ కాంబినేషన్, రైట్ మిక్స్చర్ ఆఫ్ both unitary as well as federal. Under normal circumstances, India acts as a federal, and under exceptional circumstances, the entire country acts as a single political unit. That's why India is called as quasi-federal, and whatever system we have in India is called quasi-federalism. So most of the countries inspired from India, and they have also opted for the quasi-federal system. So with this, I'm concluding the topic quasi-federalism. Thank you.